What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and this is another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. I'm joined by your favorite beat reporter, Chris Fedor. What up, Chris?
What's going on, Ethan? How are you, man?
I'm excited, Chris, because it's time for another rendition of everyone's favorite episode, Hey, Chris.
Woohoo!
Let's dive right into these questions. First one from Dave in Tucson, and it's a two-parter. Are Mobley and Garland going with the team to Paris?
Yeah, they are. I talked to Darius about this the other night when him and I were talking right near the Cavs bench during pregame warmups, and he told me that he was going and he was excited about it. Now, he's in a situation here, Ethan, where he still has wiring in his mouth, so everything that he has been eating has been in smoothie form. So he said that he was looking forward to getting croissants in smoothie form somehow, some way. But he is going, Evan Mobley's going, they're going to be around the team. They're going to be doing events together. There are dinners together that they have planned. And basically everybody in the organization is going to be in Paris, from the front office all the way down to the coaching staff, to the players. It's a whole team-wide event. And it's a chance to build chemistry and camaraderie, just as it is a chance to win a basketball game.
So yes, you will get to see Evan Mobley probably in his puffer jacket again in Paris.
I would think so. I don't know what the weather's supposed to be like in Paris. I didn't really look that up.
Oh, it's cold.
Is it cold?
Yeah, it was snowing today.
Oh, jeez. Oh, yeah. He's going to break out the puffer jacket. I bet he's going to break out that white one that is so slick. I've asked him a couple of times where he got it and if he thinks I could pull it off, and he laughed at me. So,
Nah, he laughed at you. I mean, you rock, it's like a puffer vest.
yeah, that's my go-to.
That's hard. I like that. All right, off the fashion point, because we're not talking about Karis LeVert, but does the team fly to Paris on the normal team charter or first class on a major carrier? Does business/horizontal laydown even work for NBA players?
They had lay-down flatbeds. I don't know if it works. I don't know if it was comfortable. I've never been on a plane to enjoy that. I don't know how it works when you're talking about 7-footers and guys who are all supersized, basically, but they're going to be as comfortable as possible on this particular flight, there and back. But I do know that some of the broadcasting team that usually flies on the team charter had to fly commercially. So take that, broadcasters. You got to fly like me for once.
The Bally team is going to Paris, you know. They're in a different tax bracket than measly sports writers. But next one from Howard, another two-parter. Knowing how closely Garland and Mitchell worked with Ricky Rubio, was there a most important lesson that they might have learned from Rubio?
Yeah, I've talked to Darius about this a few different times, Ethan. And the thing that he told me that he picked up the most by watching Ricky was the stop-start, the pace. And Darius, when he first came into the NBA as a rookie, he was basically going 100 miles an hour into play calls, into sets. And it wasn't a herky-jerky game. It wasn't slowing it down, speeding it up, slowing it down, speeding it up. So that's something that he learned from Ricky. Ricky is somebody who, throughout the course of his career, Ethan, was always in control. He was never rattled. He was never sped up. He changed pace based on the defensive coverages and based on what his team needed as well. So Darius learned, one, the change of pace from Ricky, and two, the keeping your dribble alive for as long as possible. You know how Ricky is. Ricky would drive baseline, and he would just keep dribbling all over the court, where some guys would pick up their dribble and then they would get stuck. But he would keep it for a beat longer, 2 beats longer, and that's something that Darius picked up as well. In the sense that I got from Donovan and talking to him, one of the things that he really learned from Ricky was, number one, being your authentic self and how important that is in terms of leadership, but two, accountability. Donovan came into the NBA as the next great hope for the Utah Jazz, and Ricky Rubio was in Utah at that time, and so was Joe Ingles. And both those guys held Donovan accountable early in his career because they wanted him to be his best self and they wanted him to live up to expectations. And Donovan learned how important accountability was during those early years in Utah. And Donovan, as you see throughout the course of his career, has stepped into more of a leadership role, and he has been more willing to hold his teammates accountable and things along those lines.
Right. And I mean, it's crazy to think about Darius Garland, someone who you feel as of now kind of plays lazy and then turns on the 2K boost to get by defenders. And that's how he does his little slow start switch game.
I mean, you got to keep the defense off balance like that. You have to. And I think being around Ricky, they would watch film together on the team bus. They would watch film together on the team plane. Rajon Rondo also had a hand in mentoring Darius Garland for the stretch that he was with the Cavs. But just soaking in that knowledge, right? And learning what it is to be a professional. And when you're somebody like Ricky Rubio, who has done it right for your entire career, and you've been a professional since you were a teenager, just being around and having the guys see what it looks like to have a top level work ethic, to have the guys see what it looks like to be a true professional, and how Ricky went about his day to day, how Ricky went about his workouts, how Ricky went about his film study, and all that kind of stuff was very beneficial to a young Darius Garland. Just like Devin Booker has said the same thing, Anthony Edwards has said the same thing. Like, those three guys, Darius, Anthony Edwards, Devin Booker, and Donovan Mitchell, those four guys have all talked about Ricky Rubio being one of their favorite teammates of all time, and all the things that they have learned throughout the course of their career coming from Ricky that have allowed those guys to get to the level of where they are right now. Obviously, a big part of it is them, their talent, their coaches, and stuff like that. But they all say we wouldn't be the same players that we are today without the influence of Ricky Rubio.
Slightly off topic, but you mentioned someone dribbling the ball and not picking up their dribble like Ricky Rubio and how important that is, especially for a point guard of an offense. And my favorite memory that comes up from somebody doing something like that is LaMelo Ball in high school, literally just dribbling around the defense, like in a circle, and the crowd literally reacting, thinking, where is he going? Oh, he's going back to the top of the key. He was just at the baseline. Where are you going? I mean, that's a testament to what he's been able to do in the league, and obviously not dribbling around defenses, but being able to be a key facilitator and keep the ball dribbling and moving.
Ricky called it, and Darius called it gnashing, as if they got it from Steve Nash.
I wouldn't be surprised by that. But back to the Cavs. With a taller guard lineup without Darius Garland, the Cavs have played a switching defense, which is much more often to be considered successful. What happens when DG returns in the defense that they're going to play?
Look, I mean, I think the Cavs are going to have an element of switching involved in their defense. If I understand the question right, he's talking about them being more willing to switch without Darius.
The question literally stated the Cavs have played a switching defense much more often to considerable success. So it's been more successful.
I don't know if it's increased or decreased based on whether Darius is out there. I do know that the Cavs, by nature, have certain positions where they're willing to switch and other positions where they're not as willing to switch. Like, they're okay switching their big guys onto guards because they trust Jarrett Allen and Evan Mobley in those situations. Sometimes they trust Tristan Thompson in those situations. It depends on the matchup, it depends on the player, depends on the team that they're going against. But the Cavs, by nature, Ethan, haven't loved the idea of switching with their ones and their twos when it's Darius and Donovan together. I think they'll switch with Max Strus. I think they'll switch with Dean Wade. They're okay switching with Karis LeVert. But like, those principles, I think, are going to be there regardless of whether Darius is in the lineup. And I just think it's based on position and it's based on player. It's not a switch everything defense. It's switch most things, but not everybody has the freedom to switch everything the way that, the Golden State Warriors did in the past, the way that the Boston Celtics currently do right now, the way that the Miami Heat do at times based on their personnel. So yeah, I mean, I think the switching element of the defense is going to remain even when Darius comes back. It's just you're not going to see Darius switching onto some of these bigs or onto some of these wings. They're going to ask him to fight through screens, and they're probably going to ask whoever is the pick and roll defender, whether it's Evan Mobley or Jarrett Allen, to guard the pick and roll in a different kind of way than just switching it outright.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. But when we come back, we're going to get into more questions from our subtexters. But before then, become a Cavs insider and interact with Chris and I by subscribing to Subtext. Every Tuesday, we air a new Hey Chris episode, so make sure to subscribe and keep an eye out for the Monday Subtext asking for your questions about the Cavs and more. Sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word stop. It's easy, but we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from myself and Chris. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. We'll be right back. All right, we're back. Chris, let's get into this second round of Subtext questions. With the Cavs having a plethora of depth at the two guard position, Donovan Mitchell, Karis LeVert, and Sam Merrill, along with Max Strus, which player is the most likely to be dealt at the deadline to improve the small forward position?
I don't think any of those guys that the subtexter brought up right there. I think if the Cavs go out around the trade deadline and they look for improvements, I would expect them to try and engage with teams on a 2-for-1 type deal. That's part of the benefit of the Ricky Rubio buyout. It gives them more salary cap flexibility. And my sources tell me that Ricky Rubio gave back $5.4 million of his remaining contract. And that's obviously spread over the next 2 seasons. But it was about half of what he had remaining in terms of guaranteed money on his contract. So Ricky did right by the Cavs in the buyout, and the Cavs benefited in terms of salary cap space for the remainder of this year and for next year as well. But they also freed up a roster spot, and they are going to be further away from the luxury tax as well. So I would expect them to try and engage with teams on a potential 2-for-1 type trade where they take one player back for 2 guys. And again, I don't think the Cavs are actively calling teams and saying, take X player off our hands, but I think they're gauging the trade value league wide of Isaac Okoro and Dean Wade. And that doesn't mean that the Cavs are going to trade both guys. But if you combine both of their salaries, all of a sudden you can get in the ballpark of a $10 to $12 million a year player. And that opens up some doors. Now, obviously, the Cavs would have to attach second round picks, maybe multiple second round picks, and they would have to get pretty creative in terms of the kind of player that they would chase in a trade upgrade, because they don't really have a whole bunch of appealing draft capital. They don't have a bunch of first round picks. They don't have a bunch of expendable young players that could be the centerpiece of a mega trade, for example. But I do think that they'll explore the possibility of combining Dean Wade and Isaac Okoro together and seeing what kind of player they can get back in return. And if that's what they would consider an upgrade at one of those spots, whether it's the 3, the 4, maybe a backup point guard, then I think the Cavs would be willing to go that particular direction.
With that in mind, is there any chance the Cavs would have an interest in a blockbuster deal for Tyus Jones and Kyle Kuzma of the Washington Wizards?
Tyus Jones is somebody who is on their radar, has been on their radar. It's interesting, though, because Tyus left Memphis in part because he wants to be a full-time starter. And that opportunity would not exist here in Cleveland, not with Darius Garland at point guard. So I don't know how happy he would be going into a backup role once again, just like he was in Memphis. And Kyle Kuzma just doesn't seem like a Cavs type player. He doesn't seem like a JB Bickerstaff type player at all. He's somebody who is a volume scorer. He's going to need shots. He's going to need plays called for him. Cavs already have stylistic complications every now and then, getting Jared Allen involved and keeping Jared Allen involved and making sure Darius Garland gets his touches and his shot attempts. And I just don't think Kyle Kuzma would be a really good fit for this group. Part of the reason why Dean Wade is a good fit in the starting lineup is because you don't have to call plays for him. He doesn't need shot attempts. He's a low maintenance player. He's not going to complain if he just goes out there as a floor spacer and a 3-point shooter. And I just don't think Kyle Kuzma is the winning type player that would make a significant difference for the Cavs, or even one that the Cavs would want back in return. The name to keep in mind, and again, I don't know what it's going to cost, and I don't know how much interest there is from the Cavs perspective in terms of, like, they can't really make a bunch of trades at the trade deadline, right? Because they have limited assets. So they have to be really judicious about how they're going to use those assets and what type of player they're going to get back in return and the caliber player that they're going to go try and chase at the trade deadline. But I do know that the Cavs had conversations with PJ Washington and his representatives this past off season before he stayed with the Charlotte Hornets. And I do believe that the Cavs are still interested in PJ Washington from everything that I have gathered. And I do believe that he is somebody that is on their radar. And before they went out and pulled off the sign and trade for Max Strus, the Cavs engaged with the Charlotte Hornets and asked, hey, what's it going to cost for PJ Washington? Is there a pathway for us to pull off this sign and trade? And Charlotte was not interested at the time in what the Cavs had to give up. And Charlotte wanted to keep PJ Washington, and that's why he's on the roster. But that's somebody to put on your radar. The other guy that they've had interest in the past, and Detroit just does not seem inclined to trade him away. And if they do, it's probably going to cost more than what the Cavs have to offer. But Bojan Bogdanovic has been on the Cavs' radar for a couple of years. Obviously, he played alongside Donovan Mitchell in Utah. He can play the 3 and the 4. He's got a bunch of playoff experience. But like I said, I do think what the Cavs would be willing to give is not something that would make Detroit finally turn around and change their stance on Bogdanovic.
All right, 2 points from me before we move on to the next question. Maybe even get a question from me, but well, before we get there, you mentioned Dean Wade not being a Kyle Kuzma type guy, and I mean he has been such an impactful player in the starting unit in this last 11 games with Evan Mobley and Darius Garland being out. And you look at the last game against the Spurs, Dean Wade played 11 minutes. And you don't see somebody that's gotten bumped from the bench to the starting role and then played less than 4 of the people that came off the bench. The only person that played less minutes that actually entered the game against the Spurs was Craig Porter Jr., who played 4. And you don't see Dean Wade looking for minutes. You don't see him like he wants to be as impactful, as important as his requirements are called upon. Like, it's not something that he's looking to be the highest scorer or whatever. He's looking to do his assignment and continue to be successful in the roles that he's given. On another note, talking about the guys that the Cavs could be looking to trade, Donovan Mitchell, Karis LeVert, Sam Merrill, and Max Strus are the people that were mentioned by the subtexter. And I come to think, like, are there any untouchables for the Cavs? And the only player that I could think of that could be truly untouchable is Evan Mobley. Obviously, everybody has their price, but I feel like Evan Mobley is one of those guys that the Cavs have always thought is a unicorn. But when it comes to the team that the Cavs are building, you literally needed shooters. You went and got Strus. You went and got Niang. Sam Merrill has stepped into the role of a high-level shooter that some might have asked George Niang to have been this year. So I don't think there's people that are off limits per se, but I don't think that the Cavs are willing to make changes to a team that has been working, especially in a time where they don't have their 2 star players and are waiting to get them back and reacclimate and see how they can mesh and gel this team that's been working with a different stylistic play.
I think we start here. The Cavs believe in this roster. The front office wants to see what this all looks like together. When they went out this offseason and they acquired George Niang and Max Strus and Ty Jerome and Damian Jones, and they filled in some obvious roster gaps that they had, and they brought in guys with skill sets that were lacking when it comes to last year's roster. They did that because they believed in those guys that they acquired. And they want a real shot to see what these guys can be with the other guys that were already on the roster. And they haven't gotten that shot. I mean, even now, yeah, they're winning games. They're 8-3 over their last 11, but it's coming without Evan Mobley and without Darius Garland. in the front office, before they make a drastic shakeup, before they significantly change the look of this roster, they owe it to themselves, and this is the way that they're operating. They want to see what it looks like altogether. And if the team can still become the team that they felt it could when they assembled this roster in the offseason. Now, you never say never in the NBA. And if an opportunity comes to the Cavs, they will listen, they will explore it. But I just don't sense them having an appetite for breaking up their core four or their starting five or the top 6, 7 in their rotation. If anything, I think they're going to continue to take the approach, Ethan, that they took this past off season, where keep the core intact and see if we can improve around the margins. See if we can shed some of the back end of our roster or the back end of our rotation to boost the top 8. That's the approach that I would expect them to take at the trade deadline. And I think that's the right approach, because I do think there is a lot of upside with this roster. I do think there's untapped potential with this roster. And I do think, because the Cavs have found this interesting style on the offensive end where it's more 3-point centric, where it's more 4-shooter lineups, where it's more floor spacing, when it's more ball movement, body movement, player movement, I think the opportunity to blend that in with the personnel that they've used during this stretch will make them more lethal in a 7-game series, and it'll diversify the offense to make it so it's not as predictable the way that it was in the 7-game series against the New York Knicks in last year's playoffs.
All right, Chris, let's wrap up with a fun one from Matt in Los Angeles. More and more, Matt sees that the Cavs should retire Tristan Thompson's number, more so than Kyrie Irving. What are your thoughts, Chris?
No, there's no more so than Kyrie Irving. If we want to have the conversation about retiring Tristan Thompson's number, cool. Like, I'll listen to that. No problem. Let's talk about the merits of that. Let's talk about where he ranks in all-time games played. Let's talk about where he ranks in blocked shots and rebounds and all the other categories that have made Tristan Thompson the player that he is throughout the course of his career. But it's not at the expense of Kyrie Irving. And it's not a situation where Tristan Thompson deserves it more than Kyrie Irving. Kyrie Irving, for all the weirdness, Kyrie Irving, for all the headaches, and the way that it ended was obviously terrible and it turned him into a villain. He is the second best player in franchise history. He is probably the second most important player in franchise history. He hit the biggest shot in franchise history. Like, those things cannot be ignored because it ended so poorly with Kyrie. So when Kyrie retires, whenever that is, his number needs to be up there in the rafters. It deserves to be up there in the rafters. And Tristan Thompson, I think, is going to be a complicated situation because, again, like, he's not somebody who puts up gaudy stats. He's not somebody who is as important in terms of the Cavs championship run as Kyrie Irving or LeBron James or even Kevin Love. But there's some longevity there. This is where he started his career, and it would show that the Cavs value, defense, rebounds, blocked shots, and things along those lines. And even though he wasn't as important as LeBron, Kevin Love, and Kyrie Irving during those championship years, he was still pretty important during those championship years. He was a starter for 4 straight finals appearances. And I definitely think there's an argument to retire his jersey when his career is over.
That 2016 team, man, they gonna go down in Cavs history forever. You can't take away one person's success does not blunder the others. Like, it is a team sport, there and then out. And Kyrie Irving, like you said, hit the most clutch shot in Cavs history. Kyrie is so essential to what the 2016 team did. And I mean, Kyrie is a weird character, right? But that doesn't make him any less of a basketball player because he thinks the world is flat. That's two completely different things. Like, Kyrie Irving is probably the best ball handler the game's ever seen. That doesn't change because he has to sage the Boston Celtics arena. Like, everything is not connected. That's what, like, a lot of people don't realize for this sports thing, because sports are the break for everybody from like big news, hard hitting news. Like everybody's eyes are always on the sports world, but these guys are people. Like that's why it's like everybody's like, "Oh, how can you talk to LeBron? Oh, how can you talk to Donovan Mitchell?" I'm like, they're people. Like at the end of the day, they are people and they have feelings, they have emotions, they have thoughts, they have personal agendas, personal ideas.
They have quirks.
Exactly. And everybody is unique. Me and Chris are unique. We're two very different people, but we can have a great podcast and put it together because we can get along. Like that does not have anything to do with how our lives are separately, like on a personal basis. But all in all, like I think we need to stop having these conversations where one player getting an accolade means that another player doesn't get the similar recognition. Like that's just what it is for me.
I'm actually kind of curious now at this point, like where Tristan Thompson is on the all-time lists. Longevity is helping this. The more games he plays, the more he can continue to climb. He can pass up some franchise legends in terms of blocks. He can pass up some franchise legends in terms of rebounds. So he's third all time in total rebounds behind LeBron James and Zydrunas Ilgauskas. By the way, both those guys, well, LeBron's not up there yet, but Z's up there and LeBron's going to be up there. And number 4 is Brad Daugherty. So Tristan Thompson is above Brad Daugherty in that. And you can start looking at the block category. Tristan Thompson is 5th on the all-time list. And he can continue to climb that. He's probably not going to get any higher than 5th because he's about 200 something away from LeBron James for 4th. But like right there in that mix with Brad Daugherty and Zydrunas Ilgauskas and Hot Rod Williams. And obviously everybody has different strengths and everybody does different things on the court that is going to allow them to stand up or become one of the better players, one of the more important players in franchise history. Obviously, Brad Daugherty is a better scorer than Tristan Thompson. He's a better shooter than Tristan Thompson. But at some point, I think you have to look at the guy for what he was and reward those particular accomplishments, if that makes sense. Second in offensive rebounds, by the way, behind just Zydrunas Ilgauskas. He's less than 200 away from passing Big Z. So if Tristan could stay healthy and maybe stay on the roster going into next year, that could be within his reach.
For sure. So subtexters, let us know if you think Tristan Thompson's number should be retired by the Cavs when he retires. But with all that information, that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs insider and interact with Chris and I by subscribing to Subtext. Sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word stop. It's easy, but we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from myself and Chris. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast, and the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.